I bet you didn't know how silence can be more terrifying than any sound. The living room was a portrait of domesticity frozen in time. The air was thick with an eerie stillness, as if the room itself was holding its breath. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the coffee table, steam no longer rising. The tea had long gone cold, a testament to the hours that had slipped by unnoticed. The television flickered with the remnants of a paused movie. The static on the screen cast ghostly shadows on the walls, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. Jenna sat on the edge of the plush sofa, her breath caught in her chest. Silence. It was a silence so profound that it seemed to have a weight of its own pressing down on her. It was the silence that unnerved her, a heavy, expectant silence that seemed to press in on her, stealing the air from her lungs. The room felt like a trap, a cage of shadows and quiet. Jenna's anxiety, a familiar companion, tightened its grip. Her fingers dug into the fabric of the sofa, seeking some form of comfort in the tangible. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The silence wasn't natural. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving her in a void of soundlessness. It was the silence of something watching, something waiting. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift and move, playing tricks on her eyes. She strained to hear any sound beyond the oppressive quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, anything to break the spell. But there was nothing. The usual comforting noises of the house were absent, swallowed by the silence. She chided herself for her fear. It was irrational, she told herself, just her mind playing tricks. "It's just the wind," she whispered, her voice a trembling echo in the stillness. But the words felt hollow, a weak attempt to rationalize the irrational. But deep down, a primal instinct warned her, screamed at her, that this was no ordinary night. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The kind of wrong that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, that made her want to run, but kept her rooted to the spot. Jenna's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, desperate for a connection to the outside world, for a lifeline in the suffocating silence. But the screen showed no signal, no bars, just another layer of isolation. She was alone, truly alone, in the unsettling stillness. Are you terrified of the unknown lurking in the shadows? Jenna slowly rose from the sofa, each movement stiff and cautious. Her heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat that echoed in her ears. She could feel the cold sweat forming on her brow, a physical manifestation of the dread that gripped her. Her gaze darted around the room, searching for the source of her unease. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every corner a potential threat. The dim light cast eerie shapes on the walls, making her feel as though she was being watched. The shadows seemed to deepen, stretching and contorting into menacing shapes. They danced and twisted, playing tricks on her mind. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, but the fear was too real, too palpable. She told herself it was just the play of the streetlights filtering through the blinds, but her fear painted a more sinister picture. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, creeping closer with each passing second. She took a tentative step toward the staircase, each footfall echoing unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. The air felt thick, almost tangible, as if it was pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Her hand trembled as she reached out to the banister, the smooth wood cold beneath her touch. It felt like ice, sending a shiver up her spine. She gripped it tightly, as if it could anchor her in the midst of her fear. The steps leading up to the second floor seemed to stretch endlessly before her, each one a hurdle in her race against her own terror. The darkness at the top of the stairs was impenetrable, a void that seemed to swallow all light. A floorboard creaked somewhere above, a sound that sent a jolt of fear through her. It was a small noise, but in the oppressive silence, it was deafening. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. Her breath hitched in her throat and she froze, her eyes scanning the darkness at the top of the stairs. She felt paralyzed, unable to move, as if the darkness itself was holding her in place. Was it her imagination, or had she seen a fleeting shadow, a flicker of movement in the periphery of her vision? Her mind played tricks on her, making her doubt her own senses. She strained her eyes, trying to pierce the darkness, but it remained an impenetrable wall. The fear gnawed at her, a constant, unrelenting presence that refused to be ignored. Are you terrified to face the unknown lurking in the darkness? The hallway at the top of the stairs was shrouded in darkness, an almost tangible blackness that seemed to swallow everything in its path. It was illuminated only by the faint glow emanating from the living room below, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Jenna's hand tightened around the banister, her knuckles white with tension. She could feel the cool wood beneath her fingers, grounding her in the moment. She listened intently, straining to hear any sound beyond the frantic pounding of her own heart. The silence was oppressive, almost deafening in its intensity. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to move forward, each step hesitant and uncertain. Her feet felt heavy, as if the darkness itself was trying to hold her back. The shadows seemed to press in around her like grasping hands reaching out from the darkness, threatening to pull her into the abyss. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, afraid of what she might see if she looked too closely at the shifting shapes that lurked at the edge of her vision. The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. As she moved down the hallway, a floorboard creaked beneath her foot, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. It was as if the house itself was warning her to turn back. She flinched, her heart leaping into her throat. Every nerve in her body was on edge, ready to react to the slightest hint of danger. The sound seemed to echo in the hallway, bouncing off the walls and amplifying her fear. Each echo felt like a ghostly whisper, reminding her of the unknown terrors that might be lurking just out of sight. But Jenna knew she couldn't turn back now. She had come too far, and whatever lay ahead, she had to face it. Summoning all her courage, she pressed on, determined to uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows. With each step, the darkness seemed to recede slightly, and a faint light appeared at the end of the hallway. It was a small beacon of hope, guiding her through the oppressive gloom. Jenna reached out towards the light, her hand trembling but resolute. She knew that whatever awaited her, she had the strength to face it. The shadows in the hall could no longer hold her back. Why are there not more people talking about the fear that grips you in the dead of night? Jenna reached the door to the master bedroom, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. The air in the hallway felt heavy, oppressive, as if the room itself were holding its breath. She hesitated, fear a tangible presence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight, shutting out the faint moonlight that filtered through the window. The silence here was even more profound than in the hallway, a suffocating silence that seemed to absorb all sound. She fumbled for the light switch, her fingers brushing against the wall. A sudden creak from the other side of the room sent a jolt of fear through her, causing her hand to jerk away from the switch. The room remained cloaked in darkness, the silence amplifying her terror. You need to hear this if you're alone in the dark. Jenna. A voice, barely a whisper, slithered out of the darkness. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a disembodied whisper that sent chills down her spine. Jenna gasped, her body stiffening in terror. Her mind reeled, desperately searching for a rational explanation, but fear had already taken hold. "Who's there?" she stammered, her voice barely a squeak. The silence stretched thick and heavy before the voice answered. "You know who I am!" The whisper came again, closer this time, sending shivers down her spine. Jenna's blood ran cold. This voice, laced with an unnerving familiarity, sent a wave of terror crashing over her. Who was this? What did they want? Are you terrified to answer unknown calls? Suddenly a sharp buzz cut through the terrifying quiet. Jenna jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She fumbled for her phone, the screen illuminating her face with an eerie glow. An unknown number flashed across the screen. Trembling, she swiped to answer. "Hello?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "He's watching you, Jenna." The voice on the other end was distorted, gravelly, sending shivers down her spine. Before Jenna could respond, the line went dead. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the phone, her knuckles white, her mind racing. Who was this? And who was he? Her gaze darted around the darkened room, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that she wasn't alone. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart. You need to hear this if you're alone in the dark. Jenna stumbled back, her hand instinctively reaching for the light switch. Her fingers brushed against it, but fear paralyzed her. What if she didn't want to see what lurked in the darkness? What if it was better not knowing? But the unknown was a terrifying abyss, and she had to see. With a flick of her wrist, she bathed the room in a blinding light. For a moment, the shadows seemed to dance and retreat, but then her eyes focused on a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. He stood motionless, shrouded in shadow, his features obscured by the darkness, but even from this distance she could feel his eyes on her, cold and calculating, like a predator sizing up its prey. Terror, raw and consuming, surged through her. "I think I messed up." Jenna didn't hesitate. She spun on her heel and ran, her bare feet pounding against the hardwood floor. She could hear the heavy thud of his footsteps behind her, gaining on her with each stride. Adrenaline surged through her veins, fueling her desperate flight. She raced down the hallway, her lungs burning with exertion. The living room, once a sanctuary, now seemed like a trap. She could see the front door, a beacon of hope in the darkness, but it felt miles away. As she neared the top of the stairs, she risked a glance over her shoulder. He was closer now, his form emerging from the shadows. His face, still hidden in darkness, was a mask of malice, a chilling promise of what awaited her. "Are you terrified to be alone at night?" Jenna stumbled, her foot catching on the edge of the rug. She cried out as she fell, her body slamming against the hard floor. Pain shot through her ankle, but she couldn't stop. Couldn't give in to the agony. He was almost upon her. Scrambling to her feet, she lurched towards the front door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She fumbled with the lock, her fingers numb and clumsy. The doorknob rattled in her hand, but it wouldn't budge. She was trapped. She could hear him close behind her now, his breath hot on her neck. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable, but the blow never came. Slowly she opened her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. He was gone.